During a Security Council meeting, Deputy U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Robert Wood, said that 800 North Korean troops were in the Kursk region at the time of his speech. Our president states the group should total up to 12,000 troops. But how critical is the situation in general? Because the Russians are indeed gathering a large group of troops in this particular area of the front. And it's not just about conventional attack aircraft. There was also information about special forces as well as assault units and engineer troops. That is, there is a complete set, full chaos. Look, on the one hand, we've talked about this before, but I need to remind you. On the one hand, it seems that 12,000 is not a large number. Arithmetically, 12,000 is half of what our military withdraws in 1 month. That is, it will be enough for a maximum of half a month. Plus, compared to the number of people who entered the Kyiv region in 22, it's 40,000. That is, in comparison, it does not look very difficult. But I keep emphasizing that by using numbers, by using mass, they can achieve a result that we will be very unpleasant to see. Please take a look at the videos that our military are publishing with captured Russian prisoners. Whether in Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, or Kharkiv, they look like homeless people, hugging and crying. Yet with 20,000 to 50,000 like them, they can achieve results. They slip through our positions, gather in houses, especially in Donetsk, and launch large assaults. If they remain united and motivated, накопичуються там в будинках, якщо ми кажемо там за Донецький напрямок, і потім роблять такі великі штурмові вилазки. Тут така ж сама історія. Якщо вони дійсно будуть однією великою масою, they can create significant problems. Або деорганізовані, то тоді вони можуть зробити нам неприємності. We understand the task the Russian army is facing to push Ukrainian troops out of the Kursk region by the end of the year. This is a fixed idea.
Зараз йдеться про те, що ці війська стоятимуть на території Курської області і братимуть участь у боротьбі проти наших сил оборони там, але чи є ризик того, що КНДРівські війська зможуть перекинути на інші ділянки фронту?
Neither the intelligence community nor the Russian leadership has shown any signs of readiness at this moment.
Тобто ознак як таких станом на цю мить немає.
I can say that even in the Russian Federation, they do not know what to do with them. First, there is the task in the Kursk region, and then, according to events, how they will unfold. As an option, I suppose, there may be such a story, when they are left on the territory of the Russian Federation. Let's imagine that our Kursk operation is over. Our military withdraws beyond the state border, defined in 91, and the North Korean military remains as reinforcement on the borders, on these administrative state borders. And a certain group of Russian troops released in this way will be sent to the Ukrainian fronts. So in any case, this is a certain gain for the Russians, because they have extra hands that can be used in different parts of the front. So this is not very pleasant for us right now. In other news, Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski hopes that NATO will allow Poland to use its air defense to shoot down Russian missiles flying over Ukraine that could threaten Poland. How much easier it could make Ukraine's life in terms of repelling Russian air attacks. Because Russian missiles don't often fly into Polish territory and don't often pose a danger to Poland in the way they imagine it. Let me not be a pussy because I have this bad and that bad. Your viewers may say, why is there only one negative here? But we are stating the fact that it is.
В їх повітряний простір, навіть не те, що там наближаються, а навіть якісь залітають. Ми це все бачили, з цього глузували, і в Румунії аналогічна сама історія. Польща домагається цього рішення, але...
Poland does not shoot down missiles, not even drones that fly into their airspace, not even those that approach, but those that fly in. We saw it all and laughed at it. Romania has a similar story. Poland is pushing for this decision, but most likely the decision will be as follows. Not something that flies, for example, in the direction of Poland over the Lviv region and could hypothetically crash, but only those objects that have crossed the state border. Objects like missiles, ballistics, or drones crossing into Polish airspace can only be shot down after entering. NATO might hesitate to act, so we can't guarantee the Poles will shoot down missiles over Ukrainian cities. A similar situation exists in Romania, but they seem to be acting more strategically. The Romanian parliament has a bill requiring the armed forces to intercept any airspace violations. My view is that if there's another massive attack, such as Russian missiles or drones entering Romanian airspace, they may respond.
Залітають в повітряний простір Румунії. Румунія не має дозволу від Альянсу збивати ці об'єкти, але є...
Romania lacks NATO's permission to shoot down these targets, but has national legislation that requires them to do so. They are utilizing their armed forces and air defense systems. Meanwhile, Mr. Rudy, the NATO Secretary General, and the U.S. claim this is an escalation. The Romanians respond, "We're a parliamentary republic. Our parliament passed a law obliging us to act."
Парламентська республіка. Вони ухвалили закон, правильно, демократично ухвалили, більшістю зобов'язали нас збивати.
We cannot fail to fulfill the legal requirements of our democratic system and refuse to do so. So once again, all questions are for the legislators. We are just the executive branch. I think this option will be more workable, and perhaps if it really works, the Poles will also try to implement it on their territory. I was just going to ask about Romania, that is, to set them as an example that they did this. Could this motivate other countries to find ways around NATO's excuses? When they say, "Don't shoot down our patriot," the Romanians reply, "We have domestic legislation that allows us to act, and there are precedents. It's acceptable if drones fall that aren't considered enemies, but when armed drones enter their airspace, action is necessary." There's no political solution yet, but we've also been discussing DPRK military involvement. The Russian Ministry of Digital Transformation has signed a cooperation agreement with the DPRK Ministry of Information Technology in Pyongyang. How dangerous is cooperation in this principle? Because we know that the DPRK has already launched satellites and missiles, including because the Russians helped them. But what kind of cooperation can there be in terms of high technology if both are under sanctions? Well, really, it's a joke. I really don't see any points where they can cooperate. Similarly, the Russians signed agreements with the Belarusians with the Integral Enterprise. I remember it was at the beginning of the war, and Lukashenko was shaking his mustache and shouting that we have such technologies here that the Russians need everything. Let's produce it. But somehow, they didn't take off. It turns out that Belarusian microelectronics are not in demand even in the Russian Federation. Their demands from North Korea are still not being met. I'm curious about what they can produce together with the Russians. We've seen propaganda videos of North Korean users in classrooms, but they seem more like a setup. While I played Counter-Strike in computer clubs, these users sat in fur coats, clicking mice, but the room was silent, and the screens only showed the Google homepage with no activity. It's not clear what they're typing, where they're typing it, and to whom. Maybe they even took a screenshot on the monitor to avoid typing too much. That's why I'm quite skeptical about the cooperation. The only explanation is that this is an attempt to somehow show their people or Western society that if you don't want to be friends with us, we'll find someone else. And note that they signed agreements on the tourism industry, and now Russians have exotic tours to ski resorts in North Korea. Jesus, North Korea. I see these crying soldiers, and I even lost my mind. It really looks ridiculous and frivolous. I don't know if you've seen the video from a decade ago where the North Korean military is learning what air combat is. One person walks around the parade ground with an airplane, while another holds a steering wheel-like device, indicating North Korea's advanced technology and cooperation with Russia. Meanwhile, IWE analysts suggest that China is likely learning from the lessons the Russian military gained in the war through Belarus's armed forces.
Скажімо, країн, які мають ці технології, аналітики ЄСВ не так давно написали, що Китай імовірно вивчає уроки.
I wondered what the Chinese could learn from the Russians, and even through third parties, through Belarusians.
Цікаво, що такого китайці можуть навчитися у росіян, так ще й через треті руки, через білорусів.
This cooperation is different. China has nothing to gain from Belarus, and Belarus has nothing to offer. Belarus, on the other hand, is actively looking for countries and parties that can help it technologically, as well as materially, economically, and with experience. Belarus itself requires such experience, and the facts of cooperation, as well as those trainings, are more related to the fact that Belarus wants to learn something from the Chinese. Perhaps. They believe they have valuable Asian experience to showcase to their citizens, demonstrating that while other countries may refuse to engage, China is willing to communicate and conduct exercises with them. Hypothetically, China might see Belarus as a potential platform to deploy military units or bases. If Lukashenko allows it, in principle he can allow it, and from this base to conduct reconnaissance, for example, in the direction of Western Europe, the Baltic states, the Baltic Sea. Let's imagine where China is and where its technical development capabilities are in Europe. And if they are located in Belarus, their capabilities, I don't know, will expand many times over, increase perhaps 100-fold. Belarusians seek support from China, but lack military experience, a sensitive topic for Lukashenko. By the way, I wondered why they can't actually learn these lessons directly, since both Russia and China regularly organize military exercises of various kinds. They engage in various military activities, small, large and large-scale, involving aviation and ships, to avoid looking suspicious. However, Belarus lacks a navy, which is actually beneficial. Training focuses on roles and interaction. European countries also continually practice within the alliance, even when it seems redundant. There are differences in mentality and language, as evidenced by pilots who would announce in English but were often hard to understand. This applies to cooperation between the Chinese and Russians, as well as among Europeans, highlighting the need for ongoing communication. However, real practice occurs only on the battlefield. And perhaps the Russians are also in no hurry to share with China those practical gizmos, some features that they invented or stole during this war, solely to keep something for themselves and not share it even with their best ally. By the way, there is another important topic that concerns the Russian Federation's ability to mobilize its population. The GUR has recently reported that the Russians have begun to form assault units made up of prisoners with hepatitis B and C. They will go to war against Ukraine. In Russian prisons, 15% of convicts with this disease expressed a desire to join the war and go to the front. On the one hand, could this indicate problems with manpower in the Russian army? But on the other hand, this is not the first time we have seen this, because at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the situation was similar in 2022. Look, I am more inclined to believe that there are problems with people. Many factors indicate that there are not enough people, despite the fact that our military is overwhelmingly present at the front. But there are fewer and fewer people. The reduction in recruitment requirements for Russian military prisoners highlights a trend. Initially, they accepted recidivists and murderers, and later, as applicants dwindled, they began to include drug traffickers. This ongoing lowering of standards contrasts sharply with the earlier days of Wagner, when joining was highly competitive and difficult.
Я можу це порівняти, ось така чудова аналогія, практична аналогія, коли Вагнер, коли він ще існував, до початку повномасштабки потрапити на службу або підписати контракт з Вагнером було нереально, просто unreal, неможливо. Люди проходили виснажуючи там допити, тести.
People underwent grueling interrogations and polygraph tests. If it turned out that the candidate had relatives in the FSB or among journalists, he was immediately rejected, added to the blacklist, banned, and goodbye. After the Wagnerians began to run out, even the backbone, the bar was lowered to the level of walking to the recruiting office on your own 2 feet. Okay, you're already a cool guy. We're already recording this. So it's the same story here. They're just lowering the bar. And so far, we haven't seen women prisoners in large numbers, but I think the work is also underway. And money and some additional offers, maybe they just haven't been creative yet. They are still relying exclusively on men. Mike Turner, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, suggested that the U.S. and NATO allies should be ready to directly attack North Korean troops. This is a quote if they are involved in combat operations in Ukraine on the side of Russia. This is a direct message to us that the United States and its partners are ready to intervene in this situation only if North Korean troops set foot on Ukrainian territory. And the fact that they will be fighting Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region does not count. This statement comes ahead of the elections and inauguration. I have little hope that the U.S. will provide additional weapons. When North Korean troops entered Ukraine, we urged the Pentagon to supply long-range missiles to help the Ukrainians.
Так побачили, що північно-корейські військові зайшли на територію України і ЦРУ телефонує в Пентагон, каже: "Все, Джек, там почалося. Передавайте Україні це озброєння з Білого дому. Так, передавайте далекобійні ракети, хай українці гамселять їх."
So far, this is really not seen, because of the election, the moment of inauguration, and this transitional administration, which is already sitting on its suitcases and does not want to make any serious, fateful decisions, will shift responsibility to the new administration. Although there remains a really small percentage that, when Joe Biden sits there in his office and picks his nose, and says, okay, basically this is it. Well, basically, there's a week until the new president. Let's give the Ukrainians this permission. Let them hit. A barn burned down in the Atacoms Mountains, and while that option exists, efforts are focused on preventing Ukrainian attacks. Mr. Kirby mentioned the need to analyze the situation regarding the North Korean presence, prompting a bewildered reaction from a journalist who questioned their lack of knowledge. I jokingly remarked that the bigwigs must have gone mushroom picking, and then sell it in Pyongyang and make money. Ivan, thank you for joining us today.